Is this working? Not yet.
Yeah, I think we're. So, my name is Chris Monsieur. I'm a faculty member here in Civil and Environmental Engineering, together with my colleagues Rob Bertini, Miguel Filiozzi, Jennifer Dill, John Glebe. But we co-organized this Friday transportation seminar. So we're very pleased today to have Robin Chase to talk to us today about car sharing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
For the
mic
video.
is just for the web.
Okay. Well,
So,
do you think red's on?
Red on.
And where's the clicker? So this is a talk I prepared only a week and a half ago, and I feel like it hits everyone's heads. So the anatomy of sharing, and it was really interesting. I was trying to parse Web 2.0 out from other types of sharing, and it was really instructive to me to put it into this new way of looking at it, and I hope that it provokes you to think about assets, resources in different ways. There you go. So I have to start with my favorite scare the daylights out of everyone to begin with, and then we'll get to a nicer place after that. So this is a timeline. Even though it's not 2008, I'm leaving 2008 up there because it's when some of these quotes have come from. And if we think about climate change and CO2 emission reduction, there's this huge emphasis on what's going to happen in 2020 or 2025 and 2050. We're going to have emissions down by 25% or 60%, 80%. What's going on there? And I feel like this is an incredible distraction of what the real issue is. And my favorite person, a scientist, is Jim Hansen, who heads the Space Goddard Institute, and I guess one of our top climate change scientists. And he has said, and not in 2008, if we continue with business as usual, so CO2 emissions continuing to climb 2 to 3% every year, we will end up with 0% chance of averting catastrophic effects. Catastrophic effects is something that is a kind of term of art, and that would be a 3-degree Celsius temperature rise globally, and the implications of that. And the one that I find to be most horrifying is a 50% species loss this century. So just sink that in for a minute. 50% species loss this century. You know, we're not talking about some science fiction movie disaster film. And 0% chance if we continue on the business as usual until that date. John Holdren, another famous scientist who fabulously for all of us is now Obama's chief science advisor. So he's sitting hopefully in the room next door to Obama. And he said in 2008, if worldwide emissions tip, so if we're on this path and it tips in 2015, now 6 years from now, we have a 50% chance of averting catastrophic effects. So I'm hoping that you guys spent some time with statistics. Those odds suck. I'm not interested in playing with those odds. So the place that we really need to be focusing is here, right now. You know, what are we going to do between now and the next few years? And that'll give us 80% chance odds of not having catastrophic effects. And what kills me when I listen to politicians and when they're telling the public what they want to hear is, let's do some fuel-efficient alternative fuel cars. Let's build that next power plant. Let's build this great, smart development communities. All of that, if we started today, which, by the way, we aren't, if we started today, it would be playing out way out in this space here and has nothing whatsoever to do with what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. I think my next slide is I put together, let me just go quickly, yeah. So if we think about this issue, I care about transportation. It's the realm I've been working in for a long time. Why care about transportation? Because our personal cars are 20% of the US CO2 emissions. To put that into some perspective, the second largest thing that any one of us do as individuals is our residential utility bill, which is 17% of emissions. So think of your residential utility bill, the refrigerator, all the lights, your laptop, the radio, anything you've got plugged in, 17% versus one item, the car. What's so striking to me is that people are hyper-focused on all those other things and just want to have complete blinders when it goes to this one blasted item that is such a big hit. So therefore, I'm spending my time on this 20% place. I guess I want to make sure that you know and believe. I think we need to be doing all those things. I just think in the current climate and in the new administration, there's still this extreme emphasis on the other things and just about zero on transportation. So I'm trying to right the balance. I think we need to do all these things, but this transportation piece is totally under magnified. So this is a slide I have for transportation guys, which I hope you are, and to orient you to this slide I made up. So I'm trying to look at, if we start today, where will we feel the impacts of real CO2 emission reductions? So here's 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 plus, and things we can do in rural areas, things we can do in suburban, urban, and everyone will take advantage of it. So if we started today building cool new train lines, we're going to see it in that 10 to 15 year space. Same thing with walkable communities, light rail, all these things. What strikes me, my current company is called GoLoco, and one of the things I try to enunciate to people when they keep talking with glee and joy about the fuel efficient cars and alternative fuel cars, if every one of us starting today in America, when it was time to buy a new car, bought a fuel efficient or alternative fuel car, in year 10 from today, if we started doing it, we will reduce demand for fossil fuel in this country by 5%. If instead, starting today, every one of us shared one out of every 10 rides, or didn't take one at every 20 trips, we would reduce demand for fossil fuel by 5% this week. And that's the difference. And so I look at this and I think, let me see this. So we're in this space here. This is where we can move minds. And here is all the things that take matter, bits, physics. We have to build these things and build out this infrastructure and do all this stuff. And it can't play out in this realm that I really, really care about. What I want to point out, what's quite interesting to me, is how do we move minds is behavior and pricing. So it's about market and prices. And what we see is that congestion pricing is an example. Do you guys know what congestion pricing is? I'm hoping everyone here. Congestion pricing is this fabulous example of how money matters. So when they started congestion pricing in London, overnight, literally overnight, the clock turned midnight, 20% reduction of VMTs the next day. And they did a nice 7-month experiment in Stockholm, and the same exact thing happened. 20% reduction overnight when it was turned on. 7 months later, experiment over, 20% reduction the very next day. So when we're looking at this little tiny time period we have, I think, wow, money talks. And we can make those changes fast. To make what I didn't point out when I was talking on my calamitous slide, how do we get worldwide CO2 emissions to tip? They're increasing at 2 to 3% every year. So I'm not suggesting that we need to get 25% cuts in the next 2 or 3 years. We just have to reduce by 2 to 3% this year and 2 to 3% next year. And now we're on the downward slope. It's a very achievable thing. And a horrible, incredibly fabulous side effect of our economic decline is we'll be seeing reduced, probably flattened CO2 emissions over these next few years. So I think it's a brilliant opportunity for us to educate the public to get with the program. We've just bought ourselves a couple years. So it's a very positive downside. So here's other things. So car sharing, which I know a lot about. Car sharing is another example of where price talks. That we know from experience that if it's my car and it's parked downstairs and I say, I want some ice cream, I get in the car and I go get some ice cream. When you're doing car sharing, I want some ice cream. It's going to be $8 to $12 an hour. You know what? I'll eat some cookies. You completely change how you're going to do it. And I think we see as much as 80% reductions in vehicle miles traveled relative to the norm in America because people are paying every blessed time they get in their car. So they're using it in a very, very rational way. So again, price talks. And I'm going to move on from here because I want to talk about sharing. But I have strong opinions about carbon taxes versus cap and trade for the reasons of this graph, that cap and trade affects power plants and how they can retrofit and do cool things. And that's going to be playing out in this space of time because you have to do the retrofit to get the emissions down. And so I was in Washington earlier this week. I met with 3 congressmen, 2 of which told me, get over it, Robin, we're never doing gas taxes, period. I mean, never doing gas tax increases, VMTs, or carbon taxes, so just forget about it. So what I told them is, if we're doing cap and trade, and this is John Holdren taught me this, is that when they're negotiating cap and trade, they should give away anything they want for the 2020, 2050 goals. Like, fight hard so it looks like you're fighting, but give it away, and in exchange, we want the CO2 emission caps to happen as fast as possible and to have as little legacy buyout fake things, to have those things happen as fast as possible, and to include petroleum refineries. Otherwise, transportation isn't even on the cap and trade map. But it's because by the time we get to 2020, we'll be in such a calamitous shape that people will be willing to take those bigger bites. So we've really got to focus on getting those emissions reduced now, fast, and trading off the rest. Okay, now for the positive part of the talk. So I have been thinking a lot about sharing. And so we have simple, everyday sharing. And everyday sharing is, I've got my stuff, and I'm going to share it. And I couldn't figure out how to change this, otherwise I would have to make nicer colors. I'm going to share it with my friends, my neighbors, trusted people, family. So if you're around me and I'm happy to share, it's good for you. So here we have obvious sharing. Here is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, well-worn. You get to borrow your friend's books. Everyone has some spare bed, and so lots of people, you can come stay at my house. I've got a spare bed, no problem. This isn't my house, this is a Flickr. I was thinking that if I were a really good performer, which I'm not, I would sneeze and say that's another kind of sharing one-to-one that isn't so good. And this, I should have increased up, I forgot. But you also might be able to borrow my car. Because you're a friend of mine, I trust you. It's in my driveway, lots of use. So what does this look like if we plot it out? So here's my orange stuff. And if you're one of my nearby friends, you're in luck. If you're one of my friends that lives out here in Cincinnati, tough. You're not close to me. Them's the breaks. But if you're near me and I want to share it, it's looking good. Another kind of simple sharing. One company's assets to many people. So there's the company stuff, and the company will share it with anybody who's going to pay for it. And what was striking to me as I was putting together this talk is that Zipcar, people thought was so innovative, and Dave Brooks is here, the father of car sharing in America. And what was innovative about it was that people hadn't thought of sharing cars, but in fact, it's a very common model. So we have libraries, which I have to say doesn't quite fit in because you're not paying for it. But libraries were a fundamental early sharing, around the country. We paid for books. You could go share those books. Here's the version of bed sharing. And bed sharing, a.k.a. hotels. And this is kind of what it looks like. There's my corporate version. Here's in D.C. What's this called? It's called D.C. Bike Share or something like that. So you guys have all heard about Paris. I was trying to use a different kind of example. And of course, Zipcar. What I want to point out about this, and these are the things that you know, so I live in New England, and I can be renting cars everywhere, and there is a little dot for Portland. I don't know why the bubble didn't. Oh, that is. Well, there's a dot up there. So in New England, I can be renting a car in any of those towns, and here's what Boston looks like. And my neighborhood is about right here. And so there's 800 different cars for me to choose in Boston, and there's 5,000 cars for me to choose across the U.S. Pretty fabulous. And I like us to think about unexpected benefits when we share. And so unexpected benefits for people sharing instead of owning their own cars are I have my fleet of 5,000 cars everywhere in the country. So if I needed a car here in Portland, as you know how amazing, I have a car here in Portland, and I have one in Washington, D.C., and one in New York. Like, that is pretty astounding. I also have the car that suits my life phase and my errand. At home, I have one blasted minivan because I have 3 kids who are now grown up, and I'm using the blasted minivan all the time. But if I were cooler and I want to go on a date with my spouse, I could take the Mini Cooper. And if I wanted to go to Home Depot, I would be taking the pickup truck. Way better than people owning their own cars, you poor guys. The other piece is I never have to maintain it. It's the car your mother said you couldn't have. You're responsible when you're having it, and when you're not using it, someone else's problem, who cares? So there are these incredibly profound and fabulous unexpected benefits to using a shared asset rather than an owned asset. So here's what this looks like. Here's the company's placed its assets all around. If you're sitting over here, not near the asset, too far to walk to, sorry, tough. And up there, that asset's pretty nicely used. And in this example, this company is really screwed up because they've got a huge number of unused assets that they put in the wrong spot. And what a shame. I'm thinking about Las Vegas right now, or all those great places in the Caribbean that there's no one at those hotels, a lot of empty beds out there. So when we think about, from a company's perspective, they have to get an ROI, they have to place the asset in the right place, and they've got to get a return on investment around that individual car. So they're placing their bets, and you're hoping that you're near one, and you have to do a good job maxing it out. So let's talk about Web 2.0, this new phenomenon, sharing 2.0. So it's a personal and collaborative, and it's from many people to many people, and it's a little bit less clean. So examples, I have a colleague named Clay Shirky who has talked about Wikipedia as excess mental capacity. We used to sit around and get drunk when we were home from work, and now we sit around and think, I'd love to contribute to the world's encyclopedia. Voila. So it's a fabulous thing. I'm so admirous of this website. So it's called couchsurfing.com, and I went and looked. It's exactly 10 years old. And so now there are 1 million beds in 231 countries after 10 years. I don't think there's a hotel chain that has got 1 million beds in 231 countries. It's really remarkable. You'd be sleeping in this kind of place. But if we think about I don't want to preempt myself. So here's GoLoco, this company that I founded, which is ride-sharing crossed with social networking crossed with PayPal. And I like to think of it as it's your assets and your friends and your trips creating your personal public transportation system. That we've got all this stuff in place, huge amount of excess capacity, and together we can create a public transportation system that's our own with our own stuff. And this is what this looks like. So you have assets everywhere and people willy-nilly, and it's this big kind of clump of a mess. Like, who knows what's going to happen? The very interesting pieces that fall out of this, though, is from a sustainability standpoint, once we move past climate change, we're hot on sustainability, is it requires way less stuff. And because of this lower return on investment required, because we're all using excess capacity, those 1 million couch surfing beds, if they rent it or they don't rent it, it's kind of irrelevant. If you can take advantage of it or not. So that means that there's this much greater potential for success of the ecosystem. And when we think of these, there's the guys who have the beds and the guys who stay in the beds, and you need both things to be working. But the guys who put their beds up, it doesn't matter if anyone chooses to use it. And the guys who go, they're really enjoying it. So we're able to have much faster uptake because you can get those 1 million beds willy-nilly because no one's putting any money out. And there's a greater chance of success in such an ecosystem because I didn't put any money out. So if I rent my bed to one person, it's way cheaper than building an entire hotel with 500 beds. So my gain is much higher. And the last piece I want to point out is that when we're in a corporate setting, there's only one measurement, return on investment. When we're doing this collaborative Web 2.0 concept, we can now enjoy all those intangible benefits, and we are reaping the value of those intangible benefits because we value them. They might not be monetary, but we value them. So clearly the people with those million beds want to have cool foreigners stay with them and tell them great stories. You know, who knows? And if you're staying in one of those, we can definitely appreciate those are monetary benefits. So I want to take you one step further. So we've been talking about collaborative consumption. But we really need to think about this phenomenon of collaborative input in a much broader way. When I gave this talk a week and a half ago, it was at this funny, kind of a funny venue where I had to give this talk in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. And the slides switch out every 20 seconds, so it wasn't the whole set. But the person who spoke after me had been talking about video games that are, you know, worldwide, and people create the infrastructure and they talk, and that's collaborative play. And we can think of all sorts of examples of collaborative work. I'm hoping that everyone in this room has done collaborative work. But I'm very, very interested right now in thinking about collaborative infrastructure creation and collaborative financing. And I would say that Zipcar gives a little element of collaborative infrastructure because I personally, thanks to the needs of 300,000 members, have an infrastructure of 5,000 cars across the country. And so that would be collaborative infrastructure. And collaborative financing in that I didn't have to pay for all those cars. Each one of us, by taking our own little bite, have now paid for this infrastructure. So it's a different twist. And now I'm going to go into a realm I think you haven't thought about. And this is the work I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years. So this incredibly messy map, which I hope reminds you of the messy collaborative infrastructure, this is a map of wireless networks in Vienna. There's 500 nodes here, and it's individuals who put these boxes in their houses and have opened up their wireless system. And so in Vienna, thanks to these 500 participating people, you can have free wireless across Vienna. So it was paid for by individuals who had the devices, and these individuals are doing something called meshing, and I'm going to describe it a minute because I'm going to talk about this in the transportation realm in a minute. So mesh networking is when your individual device becomes a router and a repeater. And the metaphor that I think best explains it is to think about a wide, shallow stream. And in the old days, to get across, you would build a bridge. One person would finance that bridge, and it would always be, by necessity, first over capacity, and then under capacity. You're placing your best guess. You build the bridge. One person pays for it. Could be the government. You might charge people. You might not. Mesh networking is to get across that wide, shallow stream. You take a rock, you throw it into the river, and now everybody gets their own rock. They pay for their own rock. They throw it into the river, and now there are millions of ways to get across, and it's always right-sized with excess capacity because each person to play brings their rock that they're only using for a few seconds at a time. So it turns the economics of infrastructure building on its head. Instead of one government or one person paying for that bridge, everybody bought their rock, threw it in the river, and there's many ways to go across. So that's what's happening in this environment. An even larger one is in Athens, and I didn't show this first because this is really messy. So this is 25,000 nodes in Athens that are all meshing together. And in Athens, you open up your laptop and you have wireless everywhere. Okay, so now here's the cool part. So this is a map of the National Highway System. And you guys in Oregon, I'd like to think, have thought about vehicle mile travel taxes. And that's going to require a technology in everybody's car. Today, on this coast, I think you don't have it, we have transponders to do what we call open road tolling, and those transponders cost about $28. And that transponder is used, mine has got to be used 7 seconds a month as it goes through that gantry and is used for a second, and the whole rest of all the other possible seconds, it's sitting idle. And EasyPass, who runs it in our in Massachusetts, has built out a network of communications network, which again is being used some infinitesimal amount of its capacity because the amount of data that's being transferred to TollMe is just about nothing. So we have this gigantic excess capacity that is about to be built in this country. we'll be moving towards vehicle miles tax, VMT tax, road pricing, congestion pricing. And if we did it the right way, i.e. my way, if we did it in a clever, open way, we could produce coast-to-coast wireless infrastructure on the backs of our cars. The same exact investment that we're making anyway, if we did it in an open fashion, we could have coast-to-coast wireless for all local data transmission. I have to say, this is data you want to keep local. If you need to go to a satellite and over to London, I can't jump you over 1 million cars. But if I'm going to call Jamie, why is there any point for that signal to be going to the satellite and back? It could be going through Ed's phone over to Jamie. So I've been working hard at this, and we're making some progress. So this was exciting news on this front. In the economic stimulus package, there was $6.5 billion that was dedicated towards smart grid demonstration projects. Do you guys know what the smart grid is? Yeah. So if we think about the smart grid, it is going to be a ubiquitous and pervasive across the country. And 48 hours before that bill left Congress, there appeared this language that said the smart grid demonstration projects must have open standards and internet protocol. And I thought, oh my God, how brilliant. And then I sent out this flurry of emails to every important person I knew and said, oh my God, you've got to get that language in for the transportation demonstration projects. Likewise, because we want one pervasive, ubiquitous grid to be talking to the other pervasive, ubiquitous grid. And the way the transponders are set up today, closed proprietary systems, single purpose. So remarkably, when I was in Washington on Wednesday and I went and talked to my congressman, Ed Markey, who used to head the Internet and Telecommunications Subcommittee for 15 years, and who's just switched over to the Sustainability and Global Warming Committee, so he's my man. He said he was the one who put that language in. And so it was like the most fabulous thing. I said, okay, Ed, you're on the right thing. Make sure it gets into transportation language. But so this is the project I think we're really getting closer, and I'm very excited about it. The Ezra Print. So we've been talking about these collaborative people putting in their stuff. But there's the platform and there's the people. And you've got to get the platform right in order for the people to participate. And that's where it's really tricky. So we think about Wikipedia, fabulous platform, people participated. But you can think of a ton of Web 2.0 failed internet companies where they built a platform, it sucked, no one participated. So there's this really, it's a non-trivial thing. So we've got to think about, when you're trying to expand your mind, think along these lines. Oh, and one thing that's a little bit off topic, but I do have to throw out there for you guys. We're talking about collaborative stuff. There's fabulous examples of collaborative space where we've looked at excess capacity of physical space and multi-purposed it. If you think of roads, opening, closing roads on Sundays, or to enable bike and pedestrian traffic, or plazas that are multi-purposed, or streets that are shut down for farmers markets, or auditoriums that are used for schools and for other things. That's the same thing. We have some excess capacity. Let's open that up for other people to participate. So, getting close to the end here, we feel like we're in this world of extreme scarcity. And it's because we have this idea that all our assets are closed and proprietary. I've got to own all my own stuff. And the thing about it, when I own my own stuff, is I'm paying the entire cost myself, and I'm getting some of those benefits. But if I have excess capacity, I'm sucking up the entire cost, getting this much benefit, and there's a huge amount of benefit that's out there going useless. And if we think about this from a corporate standpoint, it means that I have to drive my innovation and content internally. I have to do all of that myself because no one else can get in there. And if you think about the iPhones, which is a slightly crummy example, but Steve Jobs was not going to be coming up with the millions, the tens of thousands of applications that are now available on the iPod. It's because he got forced to open it up, and it's not truly open, but people can put their applications. And from Steve Jobs' perspective, what's really interesting is that he's now got this farming of best innovations, and the applications he likes the best, he can buy. And now they're Apple's. Like, how good is that? All the failures he doesn't buy, he doesn't pay for. So there's this really great aspect of opening up your space so letting other people use it. And so I think of this as the architecture of abundance. The architecture of abundance is having people be able to share excess capacity so we can get the best, highest efficiency out of every dollar spent and every resource dug out of the ground. So the lessons that I want you guys to take away: look for excess capacity, figure out what the platform is for sharing, and then I do believe you'll be reaping unexpected benefits, things you hadn't even thought of. You think, wow, that was way better than doing it the closed proprietary way. So the little summary, we have ownership, which is every man for himself, and you have these other things. So simple sharing, which is great, and you have to be lucky. You have to be around the person who wants to share, and you have to want to share that thing. Corporate sharing, it's a great idea. I'd like to see more of it, but it requires really careful getting the ROI just right. It's non-trivial. Collaborative sharing, which is really amazing. Everybody does win, but it needs great platforms to ensure great participation. You can have a platform, and if people aren't willing to participate, nothing's happened. And so that's where we get into this abundance. And lastly, today we have this world with 6.3 billion people, and we need to get to the place where we have 9 billion people living here happily, and that will require a lot more sharing. There you have it. What are your questions?
And just a reminder, we can broadcast over the internet, so you have to use the microphone to ask a question, and if you don't have one, I'll come around with the
Yeah.
With the corporate model, if someone abuses the asset or breaks it, you have the corporation to kind of regulate that. Well, in the collaborative sharing process, how do you see who's regulating?
So that's to this platform where you've got to get your platform right. And so if you think of Wikipedia, an excellent example, at first they thought, we're going to have like pure sharing, it's going to be great. And then you had people who love to deface things and who were going in and screwing things up. So then they had to make a little more rules and a little more stuff. And I think that will happen as an evolutionary process. So couch surfing is another example that they started free and clear. Everybody's surfing everybody's couches. Sounds good. And as I was looking at the site recently, over the last 2 years, or last 2 or 3 years, they now have this verification. This is a friend of someone who's already been another friend, and so they've set up these rules. So I think, you can't just do it out of the box, but there are ways to get around it. I've also been struck that so I did this with GoLoco, that we have this idea of who we're willing to trust and who we're not willing to trust, and how complex is that. But I would tell you, if standing here today, if I needed a ride back to where I'm staying at University Place, and I said, who will give me a ride? And one of you guys said, you guys would give me a ride. You could be murder, rapist, who knows what, and I would be going with you because I was standing in a classroom with you. So there's these elements of trust that we have in our mind. We need this big, giant system, when in fact, we make these decisions all the time, every day, for very simple reasons. So I want to not get stuck on that. I think you can make rules around them. Is that it for questions? Well, yeah.
We have one about, I'm kind of in a litigious society here, so if we start sharing things, and let's say I do something wrong and you get hurt when I'm driving you, how do I cover my ass, and how does that work into the whole system?
With sharing a car asset? Or with what?
Anything. I'm just using a car example.
Because we're going to need to figure out the insurance systems. We're going to need to be changing those things. So today, it's one person, one car ownership models, and I think we can separate that out. And so we will be changing the liability structure. I mean, the only reason insurance is done the way it is today, because that's how we've owned and held assets. It's similar in the healthcare realm, that we're trying to separate out. So my health and my liability and my actions should follow my body around, not necessarily the asset. And with energy efficiency upgrades, similarly, that they're trying to make, when I own my house and I pay to put the solar panels, and it's going to take me 20 years to pay them down, now that loan will follow the house, not the individual. So the individual will be willing to do it while they're only living there for 5 years, and the next person who comes in will pick that up. So we're changing those old ties, because we're changing the way we're using assets and thinking about investment. Another question? Yeah.
You mentioned about excess capacity specifically. It seems like there's another advantage of that when you mentioned the corporate model, you said that, oh, you might have to wait a certain amount of time or go reserve a car or whatever in order
I didn't say those things, but you can keep going with the question.
Okay. I was just wondering, it seems like one thing you mentioned with the excess capacity model, well, it is excess capacity, that it's still your car in your driveway, and at the same time, when you're not needing it, someone else can use it. Is there some way to help take better advantage of that as opposed to the model where you don't own something, you can't use it whenever you need it, and just share the excess capacity? It seems like there's a difference there.
Well, one of the interesting things about Zipcar, and that's why I called you out on it, is I've been very careful when I was doing Zipcar to never use the word sharing, because people thought they had to wait their turn. There is no waiting your turn because there's so darn many cars that I'm not waiting my turn. When I want a car, there's likely one right nearby. So with your own personal asset, it is different, but you as your own owner of your own car will get to decide when you have excess. So you'll get to decide when you're putting it out there for other people to rent or to use. And it's also interesting to me, this piece, that while you're in control of your own car, when we come to the fabulous kayak I have in my garage, or the fancy, who knows what, the punch bowl that I use once every 40 years, I could be putting that out on a kind of Craigslist type of thing, and it's almost always excess capacity. And so I think that when it's my stuff, I'm 100% in control of when I want to put it out there. And the more, of course, just like everything else, the more people that participate, the more excess capacity there is, so you're not going to be coming up against that constraint. Yeah?
Could you say a little more about the logistics of the GoLoco and how that, if I wanted to use something, how do I get access to it and how?
So GoLoco is rides,
Okay.
regular ride sharing.
That's right.
And one of the pieces that I haven't mentioned here, and I pull out in other talks, is I do think that this sharing phenomenon is technology enabled. We need to get the transaction cost very close to zero, otherwise it's uninteresting to share, right? And I think that was what Zipcar did that profoundly changed the name of the game, that if I'm going to rent a car for an hour, two things have to happen. It has to take you 30 seconds to make a reservation. You can't do it the old-fashioned car rental way, go to the place, stand in line, fill out the forms, because you only want the car for an hour. And likewise for me as a company, the cost of that transaction has to be basically zero. And that was what Zipcar pulled together, was to say this is what wireless technology is for, this is what the Internet's made for, is sharing scarce resources and information really quickly among large numbers of people. And that's what we have now. We're all walking around with our fabulous devices in our pockets that enable us to do resource sharing in a really fast and frictionless and low-cost way. Yeah.
So I like to share my things. So I like to share things, but I'm not very organized about tracking who I lend something to. And so I wonder if there is something out there that does that for me.
That would be part of the platform, right? Because I agree with you. We all share a book, and then we're thinking, we wrote our name on the cover, but that person closed the book, and then it's gone, and I never wrote it on my piece of paper. And so that's one of the things I think that when we think about these assets that I think we could be sharing, when she wants my kayak, she did it via the Internet, and now I know she's got my kayak. And to this part about sharing also that you had raised, I'm only lending her the kayak because 40 people before her, just like on eBay, said she's trustworthy and she hasn't broken my stuff. And so that's why I'm willing to lend it to her. So this is this technology and platform enabling that enables us to trust a person that we don't know, to remind ourselves. And with Zipcar, we tell you it's 15 minutes till the reservation's over. Get the heck back here. So we're making those reminders in all sorts of ways. Yeah.
So one of the things that's nice about bike sharing versus car sharing is that you don't have to return the bike that you rent to the place that you took it from. So if you walked, you took turns on one way, and you want to just drive home because your kid's sick or whatever, you can do that. So I'm wondering if you have envisioned a way that car sharing can evolve to actually not require the person, require
a question that I have heard for 9 years. And what's intriguing about bike sharing when you say that is I've been in Paris recently doing some consulting because they have it's called Vélib, the 16,000 bikes in 1,400 parking spaces. And the mayor got it into his mind as I've been talking to his staff that he was in the shower one day and said, I know, I'd like to make Autolib, which is the same as cars, one-way car rental, all electric, point to point. And his staff members are joking, so he thinks about it in the shower, and then we have to take 3 years trying to pull it off. And this question of the one-way is a much beloved dream by every person. Like, how fabulous. I just use the car for my 14 minutes, and then it's someone else's. When I was in Paris, what I pointed out to them is this pipe dream that everyone has. Paris has the sole data set in the entire world that tells you what happens. And what happens is they have 16,000 bikes being used 6 to 12 times a day, depending on the season. And you can look at the map in Paris, and what happens is everyone goes from the suburbs into those spots. Those bike racks get filled. You can't park the bike. These bike racks are empty. They're moving 25% of the bikes every day, 20 to a trailer, and they need to be removing 35% of those bikes. How do you do that with a car? And when I expressed this so clearly to the guys in Paris, the people who are managing Vélib, Deco, they are not bidding on Autolib because I pointed out to them the reality of that operational nightmare. And people are yearning. I think, well, there's so many issues around that. And the pricing model would have to change, the marketing, the parking spaces, the management. And the reality is people are slooshing in and they're slooshing out. And those bikes are not going anyplace. The vast bulk of those bikes are not going any place when we're thinking in our minds, oh yeah, other people use it and it'll all even out. It doesn't even out. So they're moving, as I said, 25% of the bikes should move more. Yeah?
You mentioned, I don't think this one's working either, or at least the light isn't coming on. You mentioned earlier that money can help even out some of these problems, and I was wondering,
Pricing?
could it solve that problem in the sense of, okay, I can pay a little and then I have to return it where I got it,
Right.
or I can pay a lot and then I can return it wherever I like,
So
and I
that's
bear the
the-
cost of getting it back.
So that's one of the solutions that one of the mayor's staff members, his top staff member on this, and he says, no, we can do it with pricing. I said, okay, you're right. You can rent it for one way for an hour, and it's going to cost you $30 extra, because that's going to be the price of me having someone go over there to drive it back. And I think, yeah, I can. So feel free. If you want to rent it one way for 14 minutes and pay $30 more to take it back, excellent. So yeah, we can. And also with Vélib, what they also did is then they said, not surprisingly, the bicycles that are at the bicycle stations at the top of the hill, people like to ride them down and no one likes to ride them up. And so then they said, then they allocated those stations at the top of the hill, and they said, we'll give you 15 or 30 minutes free, and you can have an account of freeness. By taking it to the top, you get the 30 minutes credit free. That definitely helped, but it did not help. They still are dragging these bikes all over. So there's a couple of, you guys can picture the types of people who, like I have a friend in Paris, and he's one of the biking guys wearing his tight, thin pants and looking great. And he's always taking his bikes up the top of the hill, feeling cool. But the bulk of people are not taking their bikes up the top of the hill. So I do think, I forgot to tell you my two mantras. I think price solves everything. And if we could get the price of carbon right, we would be fabulous. If we could get those externalities included in cars, it would change the name of the game. And marketing is everything. You get the messaging right, and you can persuade people to do a huge number of things. So you could. Yeah.
I was a transportation planner at a metropolitan planning organization in central Minnesota for about a year and a half. And the executive director of the MPO I worked at, he alone was very difficult to try and convey these issues towards. And then at one point I was finally allowed to give a presentation to the area planning planners and engineers and things like that, and they were somewhat receptive. But basically, I kept trying to get through what is the best method of marketing, I guess, to get through to people who have very old-fashioned views of how things work and things like that.
Well, so one thing to this point, imagine when I started Zipcar, if I said, hey, you know what? I've got this great idea. 40% of you sell your cars and we'll put a car in your neighborhood. And you can share that. What fraction of people were going to be doing that? You know, I've got a good idea. Use your car and we'll do it. So we didn't talk about that. So what I said is, are you smart? Are you cool? Are you hip? Are you urban? Do you like paying $8,000 a year when you use your car 1 day a week? If you're smart, cool, hip, urban, have a brain, share the car. I never mentioned we're reducing CO2 emissions, this is some environmental wacky thing. I never, ever, ever, ever mentioned that. It was all, and then when I would talk to universities, I'd say, do you want to put a Zipcar for free in your lot? And what did I say? Do you want to put a Zipcar for free in your lot? I'd say, no. Did you know it costs $25,000 of parking space for a surface lot, $50,000 for above ground, $75,000 for below ground, and we can make 20 people satisfied with one parking space. And I think at MIT and Harvard, we have definitely taken one parking garage out of both of those schools, absolutely. And that is worth so many millions of dollars. And when I talk to cities and towns, I say, you've got a parking constraint problem. I can make more people car satisfied with fewer parking spaces and less congestion. So you really have to say, who is the specific stakeholder, and what in your brain can you come up with what's in it for them? And forget all of those other do good, who knows what, blah, blah, blah. And I look at, I feel like that's what's happening with our green stimulus package, is it's all about jobs and all about you want to put money in your pockets. And so you have to go for whatever it is that they're going for, so you have to be the queen of manipulation. And I feel like they need to have manipulation studies as the major, I think most of us should be going into, manipulation studies. Yeah.
So a couple questions from web viewers, but I'll just read one of them. Do you have any examples of transportation sharing that works in rural areas?
Ridesharing. The ridesharing is something that I think could definitely be working in rural areas. I've been giving some thought recently. So here's a wacky plan that I'm hoping we might be able to get a demonstration project of. If you think of those school buses that are people owning their own car, school bus cars, you know, those. So imagine if instead of the little sign on top of the car that says school bus and you flip it up and put it back down, imagine if you flip it up and it says East Portland, $3. And I've been thinking a lot about ride sharing and hitchhiking and what it is the differences and what it takes. If you think about hitchhiking, it's monodirectional. I'm not saying anything except for I want to go that way. And every single car that goes by is seeing my thumb. So similarly, if we could think about cars, that if I put a sign up and said, I don't know, where was I, Columbia River Gorge, any pedestrian on the street would think, I want to go 3/4 of the way to Columbia River Gorge, or I want to go there and I'll get another ride. So I think there's some potential opportunities if we start thinking more broadly. Yeah.
Going back to the map with the national highway system, I was just curious, I don't mean to kind of change gears here a little bit, but what ideas do you have to manage the fragmentation that's occurring with, the whole map here, with migratory routes, excessive roadkills? I'm sure living in the Northwest, we all see...
What is my solution to that? Let's get the infrastructure financing under control and we'll have money to spend on 1 million quality projects that should be attended to. And now we are using our... I've written a lot on this topic, and what's very interesting when you write online today is that you then get the 65 comments that come afterwards. And there's a couple striking things to me. One is people are concerned about locational privacy, as am I, and I intend to address it. But another one that really strikes me is how a large segment of the population believes deep in their heart that they've paid their gas taxes, and what's the problem? What's the problem? That was 1993, and what else in your life are you paying with $1993? Nothing. And yet we have this idea that what's the problem? So yeah, I think we should be tending to those things, and we're all every moment of the day making funding priorities, and I'd like to see fewer cars in general, put it back in balance so we can have more other modes of travel, including animals. Yeah.
Have there been any studies done, maybe by Zipcar, what kind of carbon reduction occurs when they implement the program?
Zipcar, like every other car sharing company, has got some light surveys, and I used to work in a scientific journal, so I care a lot about facts, and if you guys have been studying this, it's really been hard in the olden days to do real transportation diaries for any length of time. However, there's new cool ways that people are doing it with cell phones. Did you know that? So that you can carry the cell phone, it'll tell you what mode you're taking, walking, foot, cars. So Zipcar hasn't done it, but here's what I can tell you that is so I'll give you some facts, and then in my mind, there's things that it produces. So the average American is driving about 12,500 miles per car, and that would be the average American. Zipcar, which is taking not the average American, right? People who are driving, who are in cities and are doing fewer VMTs, and I don't know what the urban average VMT is, but they're having 20 to 50 people on one car driving 16,000 miles a year. It's a dramatic reduction. We also know that about 40% of people say that they sold their car when they come in, and we see that when they go out, in that we say, why did you leave? And about 40% of them are going because they're buying a car when they leave, because they changed their job or whatever. So you see it, you see the decline on the income, and you see the outtake. So I look at those and I say, that's a dramatic difference. No matter, so are there people who never drove before and who are driving? Yeah, but there's this 40% that didn't buy a car and avoided buying a car. And the other piece I want to enunciate around car sharing that feels so important to me is people get very hyped up on the efficiency of the car. And I gave a talk at Yale, and I actually had someone yell at me in the crowd that I was a monstrous person because I didn't have all electric vehicles. Let me tell you, the type of car they're driving is just about the smallest CO2 win. The biggest CO2 win is me paying $8 to $12 an hour to get in that car. That so dramatically changes how many miles I travel. That's the biggest thing. So it's, so are people driving more or less? They are driving less because I have to make the reservation. I have to walk the car and I have to pay full price. Dramatic change. I think one more question,
Sure, yeah.
but maybe you're questioned out. Yeah.
I was just wondering, thinking kind of in a devil's advocate, so if we're reducing the amount, if everyone, let's say, could go to car sharing, we reduce the amount of cars, what about all those jobs that are being lost?
Those poor car manufacturers.
Exactly. So how do we mitigate that economic loss?
And those poor railroad workers and those poor the rail tie layers. And I feel like the more protectionist we get, the more you're deviating from reality. And so when the big hit comes, it is a really big hit, which is what we're experiencing today. And so I look at us bolstering that car industry and I think is horrific because we're just going to be taking a bigger hit later. And in this global economy, I think this particularly with my goal of getting more open systems and doing a mesh network on our telecommunications infrastructure, the longer we as a country bolster our telecommunications companies and protect them, there's all those other countries out there who don't have those rules and they're going to be doing stuff the other way. So I feel like, yeah, life sucks, and it could be sucking for me if I were an auto worker, but it's way less painful to take the hit when it's this big a difference than when it's this big a difference. And all of those supports and bolstering and bubbles, you get the hit at some point. So I have 3 kids, and I'm telling you guys, be people who are prepared to change jobs often in your life. Be really good learners, and be flexible because life is going to be throwing so many things at you. So we have many transitions to get over, and that's going to be among them.
Poor buggy whip manufacturers.
And this,
Poor-
I do, you know, and I know as an individual auto worker, it's brutal, and as a country, I'd like us to do a lot more supports for people who are going to be newly unemployed. But we have to move on, yeah.
I guess like a comment or a question. If we're not spending money on automobiles, what are we doing with that money? We have extra disposable income, so it's obviously going to create jobs.
Yeah.
People don't save money.
I was on Tuesday. I was at this meeting, and a guy who was a senior VP at Walmart. I happened to sit next to him at lunch, and we were chatting. And he told me, which we all know, but he told me that they are tracking the data very specifically. Sales are inversely related to gas prices, and so when gas goes to 4, their sales decline. And so, indeed, we have these dollars. Where are we going to spend them? And cars. The amount of money of cars that we're spending on our cars that is going someplace else is sickening. And when we think about small cities and towns, and I feel like every dollar a person's not spending on their car, it's staying, at least a good fraction of that is staying here. Yeah. Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Before we thank thanks, Robin, for that intriguing presentation. I just want to make a note that we have a special seminar. I don't think you need to attend it for credit, but Modeling Transportation and Traffic in India. Dr. Thameez Arasan from the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. And that presentation will be in Engineering Building Room 315 at 10 a.m. on Thursday. So, thank you.